Hello and welcome to the Big Three podcast with Adarsh and Adam. So today we've got a very, very special guest on our podcast, and I cannot stress enough about this because I have followed cricket for 5, 6 years now, and around 10 years. But as I stumbled across Jarrod last year, I think without trying to flatter him, I think he's been one of the best analysts in cricket. So yeah, it's really great that you chose to come on because we did not expect that you'll accept our invite.
Oh, I go on everyone's podcast. Happy to come on.
Yeah. Hope you're doing well. So, like we're going to discuss on this podcast, we're just going to talk about the future of Test cricket. So, for now, what do you think about? Like, I've heard you saying in many places that 2024 has been the best year for Test cricket. Why do you think that's so? And just an overview of what you think about Test cricket right now.
Well, it was the most entertaining year of Test
Yeah.
cricket I think we've ever had. More close matches, more twists, more turns. Every time we thought we knew something was going to happen, wouldn't. We had great upsets. We had great Test matches. There were plenty of wickets, so it was entertaining all the way through. Teams scored at a really high rate. I don't know how you wouldn't think that this is the best year. I mean, there might have been years when we've had really great Test matches, but not many Test matches played.
Yeah.
Whereas I think we had so many great moments in this year. It would be hard to say that, as a historian, I can't think of another year that would have rivaled this one for entertainment value.
That's really interesting. You say that because I saw you saying that on your podcast, I think a few days ago, when you were talking about the two-tier structure, and I didn't think that myself. I thought I preferred the tests a few years ago where they were a long 5-test series where like a story was developing. There was like a narrative, and if someone was confronted by like an obstacle, they could kind of overcome it. And I don't know. For instance, I'm trying to think back to my childhood. South Africa toured here in '98. It took from about June till September to finish, and there were no back-to-back tests. It was like maybe 9 or 10 days in between, and you could kind of wrestle back the momentum. And I don't know. I find now that there are too many two-test what I would have called years ago mini series, and it's kind of a bit too done too quickly. And
it's funny you say that because there were 2 5-test series this year.
Yeah.
Where the opposition, the away team, won the first test.
Yeah.
And that meant that the series was being fought out really closely for the next 6 weeks. So what you're talking about in that South Africa series happened twice. And it also happened in the more interesting way because the opposition team winning that first test, England winning in India and then Australia winning, and then India winning in Australia, actually gave you exactly. So you got what you wanted as a test fan in 2 test series, right?
Yeah.
And on top of that, you then had probably one of the great upsets of all time in New Zealand beating India, right? Which we really haven't had many upsets of that level.
Yeah.
And another 3-test series, not quite as long, but a 3-test series where Pakistan were annihilated off the park in the first game.
Yeah.
Right. And then over the space of the next 3 weeks, Pakistan came back to win that series. You had Bangladesh, who used to be the 12th man of the Pakistan lineup, beating them in Pakistan. Like I could go on and on. Like for me, I don't know how you could go back to like a one-off series in '98 and go, well, that was over 3 months and it was a really good series. I'm not saying they weren't great series. Right? Yeah. 2005, 2001, 98. You can go back to all these great series. 1901? England, Australia, a great series, right?
Yeah.
But it was like one series that year. Look at all the great series we had in 2024. Look at all the different moments that we had. I just don't know how you look at that and say that anything else was more entertaining. That doesn't mean that the greatest test series ever played was played in 2024.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that there aren't other issues within test cricket. But to say that we didn't have the most entertaining year of test cricket that we've ever had, I don't know how anyone will make that argument with facts.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. I just think that after seeing so many years, I think 2018 was really good for Test cricket because you had a lot of tours, which I think 3 or 5, 4, 5 match tours, Test tours. From what I know, but yeah, I agree with you on that. So like we have heard right now that their plans to make Test cricket into 2 tiers and two divisions. Like it's completely different things, but I think I've heard that you promote a promotion and relegation system, which is what I'm for myself. So what do you think about that?
I think that Test cricket was badly set up when it was set up, because it was set up essentially. It was set up as a bilateral agreements between teams, which then led to the South Africans wanting to set up what was called the Imperial Cricket Conference at the time, because they wanted to be involved in it. They then set it up so that you had to be a Commonwealth nation to get in, because that was their way of sucking up to England. So it was a flawed system, which set up what I would call a private members' gentlemen's club.
Yep.
Where you had to do the right things to get in. And once you got in, that was basically it, unless you, I don't know, created apartheid, right? Or very briefly, Zimbabwe were out because of very, very bad administration due to a dictator, right? Those are the only two teams that ever weren't in. And neither of them had to prove that they were good at cricket to stay in.
Yeah.
That is not how sport works, right? Like, if you are going to be playing at the pinnacle of our game, then you should be playing the best cricket that you can. And it doesn't really matter if I don't know, if Sri Lanka tomorrow would just like, it doesn't matter about Test cricket anymore. We are going to put our 16 under 16 players, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't actually, there's nothing in the provisions that says that they should never be a Test playing nation again, and they can still play other tests against major sides if they want to. How is that okay? It's a stupid system. In any other proper sporting system, to get to the pinnacle of the league, you have to play good cricket. Even in those American leagues, right, which are enclosed leagues, right? So the playoffs are still a second tier. You can be in the NBA and you can be the Sacramento Kings and you can be absolute arse meat for 25 years or however long the Sacramento Kings have been crap for now, right? Year after year, keep changing your coach, keep stuffing up. No one cares. But in order to go to the playoffs, you have to be good. In order to play Test cricket, you don't have to be good. How is that okay? And then you go through the reasons why these teams got Test status, right? Like Australia and England, that was a bit of, they just gave it to each other, right? So that was a bit of dumb luck. South Africa was largely on the back that a lot of people from England like to go on holiday to South Africa. The West Indies, exactly the same. New Zealand was given status partly because India and the West Indies were going to get status because they were seen as better teams. And they were a bit afraid that they wouldn't have another white side to play, especially because of what was happening with South Africa, right? We almost saw a similar situation, by the way, when Pakistan came in. Canada almost got Test status, right? How is that a fair and just system? How could anyone sit here now and go, South Africa deserved Test status based on 1890 when a Hollywood actor went over as the captain of England, when England had players in that side who never played another first-class game. Right? Not another test, that was the only first-class game they played in their life was a test match against South Africa, right? And because were given that one test, they're allowed to play tests forever, right? It doesn't make any sense. And we don't even do it for women's Test cricket. As far as I'm aware at the moment, the Netherlands and a women's team cannot play test matches any longer. Right? I could be wrong on this, but they have actually played a test match. So we have said, no, they're not strong enough to play women's tests anymore. So we're not going to let the Netherlands play anymore. We don't do it with men's cricket, right? It just shows you how stupid this system is and why it shouldn't exist.
But do you think possibly that it kind of cricket's evolved in a way that the global game now is T20? And T20 is like the game for everyone. We saw Canada and USA in the T20 World Cup, and they looked quite good. Nepal looked good, looked promising. And in a way, is there an argument to say that's the kind of the global game, and that Test cricket can still be a bit niche? Is that anyway a plausible argument? Or
I don't have a problem with Test cricket being niche, but what's that got to do with not letting other teams play it?
Okay, sure.
Definitely.
Do you know what I mean? Like, if Uganda, well, I'll tell you a side I know because I work for them, and they told me this. Scotland pushed first-class cricket away, right? They basically went, well, if we're going to get Test status, how are we going to get it? It's going to be by winning games at World Cups, which is just think about that statement out loud for a minute. The way to get Test status is not to be good at first-class cricket. It's to beat Pakistan in a World Cup. It's to beat India in a World Cup. Right? Like it's so stupid, our sport, that would even be a case. But that is the case. So Scotland went, well, why would we spend all this money on making sure our first-class cricket is really good? Let's get really good at T20 cricket and one-day cricket. Let's try and upset some teams. And then if we upset enough, maybe we'll get let into, and Scotland's in a better situation than some of the other associate countries. They've got a very good domestic setup, as in a lot of people play club cricket there.
Yeah.
But it's also possible that when Scotland get to that level, they're like, we don't really want to play tests. We don't really need to play tests. In fact, I'm not sure how it would help us to play tests, right?
And you could say that happened with Ireland, couldn't you, really? Because they got test status on the back of great white ball cricket. And then by the time they'd got test status, a lot of their good players had retired, or their kind of golden generation was coming to an end.
Yeah, the difference with Ireland is they actually did really want to play test cricket. And they did, they if you listen to them, still desperate to play it. But I'm saying there could be a situation in the future where we might not even get that. I'm not saying Scotland is the team, but Scotland, Netherlands, Namibia, any one of those teams might just be like, we only have so much resources. We're not going to play test matches. Thank you for the test status. We'll play 1 or 2 so we can say we've done it. All right. And we'll take the extra money that comes with it. But we're not actually going to play test cricket. That's fine. That's okay if that team does that. It's okay if Uganda looks at their resources and goes, we want to test cricket is now available to every team in the world. We don't want to play it. Yeah. That's a decision that anyone can make. They can make that with T20. They can make that with ODIs as well, right? That is a perfectly legitimate thing. What is not legitimate is saying that Uganda cannot play test cricket. Like, what? So they can play a 4-day game with a red ball, but you can't call it this made-up term, which for about 40 years was used for all kinds of games, right? Like, we now use it specifically. And the first test matches, I think you guys would have to go and check this, but I think for the first 20 years of test cricket, those test matches were not like official tests. What happened was a journalist in South Australia wrote a list of what he considered to be official test matches, right? I shit you not, this is what happened, right? And then he wrote this list and they used it to say these were test matches, right? There were great games, great first-class games between Australian 11s and English 11s that were not counted as test matches, right? Same with South Africa. You could look at some of those South African games and be like, well, what on earth? How is this a test match, right? If you've got people who've never played a first-class game before, it's not a test match, is it? Right? So the whole idea that we suddenly decided that the test was something that only the 3 main boards and then eventually the 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 boards could have is ridiculous. It's stupid, it's elitist, and it doesn't help the game grow. That doesn't mean that Papua New Guinea or Oman have to play test cricket, but they should be allowed to make that decision, whereas at the moment, they're not. And if anyone could tell me what a team actually has to do to get test cricket, Sri Lanka beat India in the 79 World Cup. Zimbabwe beat Australia in 83 and then England in 92. Bangladesh beat Pakistan in 99. Ireland beat a bunch of teams on their way. Afghanistan beat a couple of teams on their way. All of this was World Cup cricket, right? So why does that get you test status? So even if you want to follow the test, even if you want to say, well, to get test cricket, you have to do this. Why would you have to be good in a T20 tournament to get test status? The whole thing is corrupt and stupid.
So Jarrod, right. So if I put you in the position of controlling cricket, because no one controls cricket right now, if you were put in charge to fix test cricket right now specifically, how would you go about doing it? It's a tough question.
Well, I mean, it's a tough question because there's kind of 2 answers. There's the answer of which the way that cricket is currently run, you could come up with something like what we've talked about in that last video that I had, which is a tiered system where you have 3 tiers, and then you allow any other team to call their match as a test match. But in order for them to get to tier 3, they have to be successful in the level below. I think that's a fairly normal, fine thing but that's kind of the soft reset, right? When it comes to this group. The hard reset is that you need a league. That league needs to sell its rights the same way that a World Cup does. As a big package, and then all of that money from that league goes down to make sure that the top 3 divisions are paid for. And by that I mean the grounds, the staff, the players, all completely paid for beforehand. That's the best way of doing it. The boards know this. They just don't want to give more power to the ICC. Because at the moment, the ICC doesn't run test cricket. And they're quite happy with that because that means that England, Australia, and India can do kind of whatever they want at any time. And if they get into a league situation, they kind of have to agree to a league situation. Right? Like, I'm not saying that India couldn't still throw their weight around, but Australia and England would have trouble throwing their weight around at that point. But that is the only way to do it. because what happens at the moment is you get test series that don't make any money, partly because, like, I think it was the Pakistan board when they were playing England recently. It's like, I bet a year and a half in, all the English TV companies and radio companies like tried to get the rights for those series.
Yeah.
The PCB just stuffed around until the last minute, and so they got a fraction of what they should have got on the rights deal.
Yeah.
Right? Now, I'm not happy. Look, the PCB had their own problems. Like, they should have fixed this beforehand. But it's their biggest series, right? So they should have fixed. I'm not protecting them here at all. But realistically, that should have been sold 5 years ago. It shouldn't be sold even a year before, right? It should be sold 5 years earlier. In the way that World Cups are sold that way, right? And we know exactly what we're doing. That's the way of doing these things.
And can I ask, when we only read about this in the papers or on internet or cricket sites, the proposed two-tier system that's been proposed, or has been reported, had 7 in the top division, 5 in the second division, and it wasn't clear whether there'd be promotion or relegation. Do you know, like, for a fact, or have you heard what they actually plan to do? Is there gonna be relegation and promotion, or will it just be set at 7 and 5?
No one really knows. I think it's been sold 2 ways, is what I've heard. One way is it's been sold is actually, there will be promotion and relegation, and so one team will go up every 2 or 4 years, and one team will go down every 2 or 4 years. And the other one I've heard more, as well, is that we don't need promotion and relegation. We just need the top 7 teams, and that's where we'll make all of our money. So I don't know is the best answer to give you at the moment.
Okay.
The first option, where there is no promotion and relegation, is not a tiered competition. It's just you're just setting up a Super League. You're setting up the NBA or MLB or whatever you want, however you want to do it. They will make a lot of money in the short term, but it won't grow the game. And I think coming off the best year of Test cricket that we've ever had from an entertainment point of view, I think it would be very silly to do that. And also, as I talked about in my video, it kind of, what it does is it sets cricket up, Test cricket up specifically. And Test cricket has always had this issue as well, to be a heritage product. By that, I mean, think of Jaguar cars, think of golf. Golf's a really good example of this. When I was making my documentary on the future of Test cricket, so many people were like, imagine, cricket's just stuffed up. It should be like golf. It should be like golf. And they would go on and on about this. By the time our documentary came out, golf numbers around the world had plummeted because a whole generation of people have been like, I don't want to play golf. That was my grandfather and my father's game. Like, I don't want to wear stupid trousers and spend 7 hours away from my partner who I love. Right? And it completely changed. And my generation, and even the generation older than me, not that many of my friends outside of cricket, cricketers still play a lot of golf, but that's because they don't have much to do. Not many of my friends actually play golf, right? And it wasn't picked up. And instead, my generation went to cycling, right? The next generation seems to have gone to pickleball or paddleball, right? They have that thing of you play proper sports and then you get to 30 and 35 and you play golf does not exist anymore. Right? Like it just does. And so what golf had done is it had set itself up as a sport for old men. Right? Specifically old men, not even old women, right? Which
like Jaguar
also doesn't make a lot of sense. And Jaguar, the cars, was a car for old men. Like, Adam, you seem to have an English accent. You would know what I'm talking about.
I know what you're talking about.
If someone is driving a Jaguar in England, you expect them to be middle class or above, usually well above, right? You expect them to be white, probably bald, right? Like you have a vision of a Jaguar, a person, and they kept selling the cars to those people for 50 or 60 years until the new generation does not want to be seen as an old man driving a Jag. Right? So Jaguar now are pivoting massively and trying to work out how to make their cars appeal to other people. That is what would happen with a Super League, because you are assuming that Indians, Australians, and English people will continue to go to Test matches at the same rate they have and watch Test cricket at the same rate they have without the other teams there to bring other things. Right? Without Lasith Malinga opening the bowling on TV and every young Australian kid in the country go, wait, what's this guy doing? Do you know what I mean? Like, without Andy Flower being a one-man show for Zimbabwe, right? Perhaps without Murali, perhaps without the next West Indies team. All those narratives that have helped grow Test cricket to this level will be taken away if you have a Super League. Because if you're going to have a Super League, it should probably be 12 teams anyway, right? Like
Yeah.
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 it would actually, the best thing they could do if they want to do that would be to have divisions, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, not divisions. Sort of like conferences, I suppose you would have.
Yeah.
You could do that within this setup as well, but they just want to make as much money as possible. And the Super League in the short term will do that. In the long term, Test cricket is so much more valuable than these people understand.
Yeah.
Because streaming platforms in the next couple of years, if I go to a streaming platform and I'm like, so I've got this sport, right?
Yeah.
And this sport's going to give you about 40 hours of wraparound coverage and live coverage over the next 5 days.
Yep.
Right? Then next week, we're going to do it again.
Yeah.
You know who you're going to advertise to. You know, people are going to come back and everything else. And TV executives spent years like basically pulling a Swift one over everyone else. And you look at the numbers and the money that T20 cricket makes outside of the IPL. IPL is a bit different, but you look at it around the rest of the world, a proper test match still makes a lot of money. And it makes a lot of money because it knows who its audience is. It knows that its audience will come back, and you can do repeat advertising over, as I said, 8 to 10 hours.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd heard that before as well. And I wanted to present this scenario to you. Like I spoke about the ideal scenario. So you have a situation which I find this very problematic, especially with county cricket right now, where you have players who opt to play in other leagues. Like, for example, what goes on during August. Some leagues go on during August and they choose to not play
The
in
American
county
one.
cricket. Yeah, they choose to not play in county cricket for some other reason and want to sabotage their contract, or at least keep their contract and keep both of them somehow, and making test cricket their second priority. I've heard you say before that test cricket should split apart as another sport, and I think I am completely in agreement with that. So do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, I mean, we've had sports split apart before. It's not something that's happened all that much recently. I'm trying to think of the last major one that we've had, but we've certainly, car racing is the best example of this, right? Like, imagine Formula One being in charge of the Dakar Rally and the drag racing, right? It would be weird. Like, why would they be in charge of all three? And rugby league and rugby union is obviously a perfect example. I mean, you could go back because cricket and baseball obviously share an ancestor. So a lot of these sports do diverge, right?
Yeah.
At certain times. And, when I spent a lot of time with cricket officials over the last, 15, 20 years. And it's hard for them to really prioritize 3 different formats at the same time.
Definitely.
Right? And even if you split them up, right? Like, but the ICC will still run it. Like, you'd have the ODI people wouldn't be particularly happy with the T20 people, who wouldn't be particularly happy with the Test people. Right? I don't think we are in a situation where that works. But what we are in a situation, and I haven't looked at the numbers, but the last time I talked to the Professional Cricketers Association about this, I think there was about 3,500 to 4,000 professional men's cricketers in the world. Right? There's about another 400 to 500 women, I think, at that stage as well. But about 3,500 men's. Are you telling me that from a pool of 3,500 people, we can't have 3 different formats all run with different people going in different directions? Let's say I'm trying to think of a really good example here. Let's say you're Xavier Bartlett, right?
Yeah.
And you think, and actually, no, Nathan Coulter-Nile. Let's say you're Nathan Coulter-Nile, and you look at it and you go to yourself, do you know what? I'm probably not particularly suited to Test cricket, and I'm not particularly suited to T20 cricket, but I reckon I'm a pretty good ODI player. I reckon I might be in the top 30 best ODI players in the world. Right? If all those other guys go to Test and whatever, I can get paid a lot of money to play ODI cricket. Right?
Or someone like Dom Sibley, the reverse situation, who couldn't play T20 or 50 over, but might be able to have a career at Test cricket then.
Exactly. And so at the moment, we're not really setting it up for players to specialize in anything. And we're getting results of that, right?
Yeah.
Like, in some ways, the aggressive nature of ODI cricket and T20 cricket has bled into Test cricket, which has made it more entertaining. But it's also, it means that we don't have as many Dom Sibleys or Chris Rogers or those sorts of players around, because where's the financial benefit in playing like Craig Brathwaite? Right? Like Craig Brathwaite. Craig Brathwaite is a Test captain who's played, I don't know, 80 tests or something?
He's made a lot of runs. Or something.
A massive amount of tests, right? And he's played all these test matches, and he's probably made less than some of the IPL players
Yeah.
who've played a season of IPL cricket. Like, let's be honest, he probably has, right?
Yeah.
Well, where's the financial incentive to be Craig Brathwaite?
Yeah.
In this system, you would have an incentive to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I meant that if you're going to split apart this formats as individual sports, then do you think that T20 and ODI cricket could survive? Like, suppose you completely remove Test cricket, the way it's played from the grassroots to the professional level, you completely remove Test cricket and just specialize on T20 and ODI cricket as individual sports. So I think that will lead to the detriment of the white ball game, whereas the Test cricket could survive on its own, like it has from the 1880s or whatever. But I think that T20 cricket and ODI cricket would struggle a bit without having the backing of Test cricket in the grassroots levels.
I don't care.
Yeah.
If that's the case, then they shouldn't exist. And they're anyway. Am I thinking about it wrong? If that's the case, like, I don't care. Like, I think there's this whole thing that I remember talking to John Inverarity once, the Australian player and selector. He was Warwickshire's coach as well for a while there. He was just like, well, if people don't like Test cricket and people don't go and see Test cricket, then the people have spoken.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, we don't go into Colosseums anymore and see Christians thrown to lions.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, we don't have bare knuckle fights on as major sporting events anymore. Right.
Yeah.
Because people were like, that's too barbaric and we don't want to see that anymore.
Yeah.
That is what is supposed to happen again. Right.
Yeah.
Like, if you're right and Test cricket flourishes, that's great. I love Test cricket. I would be sad if ODI cricket died. I'd be sad if T20 cricket died. I'd be sad if Test cricket died.
Yeah.
But that's the will of the people, right?
Yeah.
At the moment, there is no one trying to make sure that those formats, any of them, even T20, which is doing really well, there's no one whose job it is to make sure that T20 cricket grows and gets better.
Okay.
Right?
I think you're spot on there. And also, do you notice how a lot of players now, I don't know if it's self-interest because they play a lot of franchise, but they do down international one-day and T20 cricket. I've heard Billings say there shouldn't be international T20 cricket until the T20 World Cup, and other people saying the same about international ODIs. Have you noticed that? Is there? It seems to me that there might be a plan or a move to just have ODIs and T20 at World Cups, and that's it. Have you heard anything like that, or do you sense that?
That was the original. To be honest, that isn't a recent thing. That's what they said. Everyone said that originally. Was just play it in leagues and then play it as a World Cup, because when the problem
Stokes
is,
formula.
Yeah. So, but the problem is, you think about what football or basketball is. That's basically what they do, right? They're global sports. Rugby is a little bit different still. Rugby still has almost a combination between cricket and football model, right?
Yeah.
But it makes sense because you can't fit all these games in.
Yeah.
That's what Sam Billings is saying.
Yeah.
Like, how do I fit all these different games in? And I think at this stage we know enough to say that there's no reason why we can't go down that style. I think I was pretty clear on that from the beginning as well. I don't see so bilateral ODIs. I don't understand why we still have them.
Yeah, same.
Because it's coming to a point now where they're clogging up the entire system.
Yeah.
You've got, and boards aren't making that much money off them. It would be different if boards were making lots of money off them. Then I'd be like, look, fair play. Yeah. Boards, I'm being told boards aren't making that much money off ODI cricket.
Yeah.
So can you see that actually officially ending though? Can you see them getting rid of them completely? The bilateral series.
I don't think we'll ever lose bilateral series because I think before every World Cup we'll have a bunch of them.
Okay.
Right. Look at the Champions Trophy starts soon. No one's been playing ODI cricket for a year and a half.
Yeah.
Right. Like, have a look at the world. It's incredible how few ODIs have been played in the last year and a half. Right.
Yeah.
And over the next couple of months, a lot of teams are playing a lot of ODI cricket. Right.
Yeah.
Now, the problem with that in the future is I think T20 cricket will just jump ODI cricket. And so I know the ICC have already been in conversations with people about making the T20 World Cup the major one and the ODI one the secondary one. Once that happens, if we're not playing any bilateral ODIs, I wonder what the future of of ODI cricket is in general. Forget the World Cup, but just in general. And then separate to that, how do you get good at a thing that you don't do anymore? So in T20 cricket, at least they're doing it. And we're already hearing players complaining at World Cups, and we'll hear the same for the Champions Trophy of like, how do you guys expect us to be good at this? We haven't done any of it for the last year, right? Yeah. And that is a very, very fair thing. So I think T20 will just jump ODI cricket. That's why this is the perfect time for ODI cricket to go out on its own as a sport.
Yeah.
If it waits 5, 10, 15 years, I'm not sure what's left of ODI cricket if T20 takes over its the mantle as the most important World Cup.
Your logic is spot on.
I should also say,
think it's possible
sorry, Adam.
Sorry.
No.
Your logic's spot on there, but do you think it's possible they think like that, or is that just not in their mindset?
What, of splitting it out?
Yeah.
I don't know who would be the person to split it out. Do you know what I mean? Like, because no one's in charge.
Yeah.
Who's the person who makes that call? Yeah. I don't really know. But I can tell you guys this, and this was reported, I think, publicly as well. But this Champions Trophy was almost changed to T20.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So my guess is this is probably the last ODI Champions Trophy, or they'll have one of each.
Yeah.
They'll have a T21 and an ODI one. But I think there was a lot of pressure for them. I think Pakistan wanted it to be 50 overs, but I think also the rest of the teams were like, we play so many T20 World Cups at the moment. If we played, because that would have meant that they would have played a World Cup in T20 cricket, and then within about 8 months they would have played the Champions Trophy. Like it would. I don't think it would have made sense. But the fact that they're already having those conversations tells you that ODI cricket. There were serious meetings. Actually, I want to take that back. Not serious meetings. There were serious discussions during the last World Cup about whether ODI cricket will continue. That's how far down some of these conversations have gone. Now it's cricket.
Yeah.
It still take another 20 years for that to happen.
Yeah. Didn't Disney lose money from the ODI World Cup last year? I think they made a lot of money, but they still lost some money from the World Cup or something.
I don't listen to companies when they say stuff like this. I'm so sick and tired of these broadcasters. They spend billions of dollars on these rights, and then instantly they go, we can't make any money. We'll need a discount. You go through it. You see it everywhere, right? Yeah. I see it. I see it in major leagues, in medium leagues, in tiny leagues. Like every time someone buys the rights to something these days, the first thing they say is, it didn't go the way we wanted. We want our money back. You're taking a bet. Yeah. We don't know how many people are going to view that thing. If you were Disney and you didn't make money off the 50 over World Cup, right?
Yeah.
Like you do not run your business correctly. Because I tell you what, I don't think we might never have a bigger World Cup than that. That was the biggest World Cup I think we've ever seen for viewership, for energy, for everything else. So if Disney didn't make money off that, that's on Disney. And I am sick and tired of broadcasters moaning about this stuff. If you didn't make money off it, do your job better.
Yeah, definitely.
So Hussain said he thinks that the one coming up in 2027 could be the last. Is that a bit over the top, or could that be possible?
We during that last World Cup, we were hearing that the 2023 one might be the last.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
That's how. As I said, these discussions have been had, right? I think one of the reasons the T21 isn't quite as big now is the last 50 over World Cup was in India.
Yeah.
And the last T20 World Cup was in America and the West Indies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you'd flip those two things around.
Yeah. Very different then.
I wonder if the T20 World Cup would not already have been, they would have already started to push it as their major event.
Yeah. So since we're talking all doom and gloom about cricket right now, I think this is the perfect time to connect about corruption in cricket. And I have gone through, as someone who's not been as exposed to what's been around with match fixing and spot fixing, all of that, going through it, I just felt like a piece of my heart broke down, basically. So I'd like to first of all know, how do you react to knowing the extent of match fixing and spot fixing in different kinds of leagues, and especially in international cricket, because I think I saw the Al Jazeera documentary and that just felt like a revelation at that point.
When does this podcast come out?
It comes out 2 days or tomorrow, I think.
Okay. I've got a big article coming out on fixing tomorrow.
Okay.
Oh, well.
So I can't quite break it on your podcast because it may not come out tomorrow because I'm waiting for a couple of people to email me back and confirm it. But I've contacted the ICC and the cricket board involved to talk about, it's not specifically about fixing. It's about some very weird situations that happen within a league that the betting community thought was a 50% chance of happening. And common cricket knowledge would tell you was at best a 25% chance. And in one case, about 100 to 1 chance. Right. So one of the situations, there were a lot of bets by multiple people from around the world that suggested that the next ball in an over was going to go for 7 runs.
Yeah. Oh.
And of course, a ball can't go for 7 runs without other assistance.
Yeah.
And without breaking my story with you guys,
Sure.
that ball did go for 7 runs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So the betting markets knew that it was going to happen, and it happened. I don't think I would ever bet on something being 7 runs coming off a ball, right?
Yeah.
No.
So, look, it's tough. It is part of our game. It comes back to that thing we were talking about before, that no one's actually in charge.
Mhm.
There's a lot of corruption in cricket that is not just fixing. There's a lot of corruption. I mean, we have a corrupted schedule for World Cups where we artificially make sure that India and Pakistan have to play each other, which means that India and Pakistan are either in a really hard group or a really easy group, right?
Yeah.
Depending on how strong each one of those teams are. Like if India and Pakistan were the 2 best teams in the world, they would have to go up in the early rounds against each other, right? Just because we have to have that game.
Yeah.
I still don't, in the Olympics and in football, people moan about the process of who gets the World Cup and who gets the Olympics, right? And there's corruption, whatever. Can you guys tell me how a team gets a World Cup? I don't know. I've been working in cricket for 17 years. It just seems like they just organize it amongst themselves, right?
Yeah.
We just talked about with Test cricket. How do you become a Test playing nation? There's a lot of money in that. I would love to become a Test playing nation.
Yeah.
What's the procedure for that? That seems like weird.
Yeah.
So there's corruption on every level in cricket, unfortunately. We focus on the match fixing because that's the bit that breaks our heart. But it isn't just the match fixing when it comes down to it. Our game is corrupted by the fact that it's not run very well.
Yeah.
Right? And you could say some of that is, I don't know, laziness or what else? Inept,
incompetence,
or incompetence, amateurism, right? You can throw it at all those things, but when it comes down to it, our sport is corrupted, and so how can you be surprised when the players involved are doing that? There are quite a few major cricket players in the world who have not been paid by their IPL franchises, their domestic franchises,
IPL,
their international teams, IPL franchises. I've written about this before. There are IPL franchises who have not paid players. Right?
That is something.
All the way down to associate teams. I believe if you have a look at the Oman cricket side at the moment, I think you'll find that if you know any Oman cricket players, none of them are playing for Oman. Right?
Yeah.
As far as I'm aware, that's all about cash again. Right? I don't know if it was they wanted more money or they weren't paid, because I haven't got anyone get back to me. I have contacted the Oman Cricket Board, but they haven't got back to me yet. But so if you're in a situation where you don't know when your next payday is coming and when your pay will come, I think the PCA said that something like 40% of T20 fees are delayed by are late, right?
Yeah.
I've had players. I was general manager of St. Lucia. I had players calling up and saying, "I can't pay my mortgage, Jarrod."
Yeah.
And I said, "I know, because I can't pay my mortgage." Right? Like, I know what you're going through. I haven't been paid either. Like, that is what we are talking about.
Yeah.
So if you have a system like that, of course players are going to do what they do. Right? Of course players are going to exploit it. And I think, honestly, it's going to get worse before it gets better, is my guess. I'm hoping in the piece that I've written, it might change the way that we start to report things.
Yeah.
But the truth is that most cricket writers never talk about gambling.
Yeah.
And because they don't have any sources within the gambling industry, they can't get the information that I got, which is simply that this did not match up and that this thing should not have happened. That is not, I'm not, in my piece, I'm not accusing a single person of match fixing.
Yeah.
What I am saying is that there was a game at which the betting market in the world thought 7 runs would come from one delivery, and 7 runs came from that one delivery.
Yeah.
We have to be asking these questions as a sport, right?
Yeah.
The same way that baseball writers and athletics writers and cycling writers had to ask the questions of enhancing drugs.
Yeah.
If we don't start asking those questions, how do we ever think this is going to get fixed?
I mean, on that point, that's a very good point, because there are a couple of cases I can remember where an incident happened and the journalist didn't press. So, for instance, the Mark Waugh and Shane Warne incident, where they said they'd taken money for pitch reports, And the journalist just like
report.
accepted it and said, okay, that was a pitch report, and moved on. And the other case, in 2010, Pakistan came here, and there was some spot fixing, some no balls from Amir, but they didn't probe any more than they had to. So the News of the World exposed some spot fixing, but there were so many other incidents that series that looked very kind of questionable, which weren't probed by the press, and people didn't go into it. I'm not saying this was the case, but Stuart Broad got 169, and he must have been dropped about 5 times in that match. And no, I'm not suggesting anything, but you'd have thought there'd be some kind of probe into that.
Well, I mean, this is the thing. It's not even. I would say if you go back to the no balls case you're talking about, the vast majority of people in the world probably thought that you could bet on no balls. Yeah. That's how badly it was reported. You can't bet on no balls, because if you bet on a no ball, any betting agency in the world, even the dodgy ones, would be like, no, clearly you fixed this, right? Yeah. Like I don't trust that at all. And so the actual fixing wasn't even explained in that case. No. And to go back to it, we have in Betfair perhaps this incredible database of where money is coming and going. It doesn't have all the money in the world. The vast majority of the money is still bet illegally in India. Right? Yeah. But the Betfair marketplace is quite often how the places in India fix their odds. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So they would just look at whatever Betfair is saying, and then that's what the bookies will release. Yeah. Right? As their odds. Yeah. Or they have their own trading platforms in India, which is based on Betfair as well, quite often. Yeah. Right? And fine, that makes sense. So can't we go through and see the betting patterns on these moments? Yeah,
definitely.
Right? Yeah. Is there anything there? Now, I know that is what the ICC has done, and I know that's what cricket boards have done, and they get information from these. Yeah. But I've never seen a player get suspended or brought in for questioning, as far as I'm aware, for repeated questionable moments where the betting market was saying that this weird thing was going to happen, and it happened when that player was involved, right? Yeah. The only league that I'm aware of this happening in was, I believe, the European Cricket League, where they use some of that sort of data, and they actually look up. If I'm right in saying this, I think they actually look up, like, if there's a bowler who has too many wides or too many no balls, they then look up to see if there's any other anomalies with that player, right? Yeah. Now, I followed the NBA. There was an NBA player who people realized that there were a lot of big bets on this player having very, very low stats in games. Yeah. And the NBA went to him with that information, and eventually he admitted that, yes, he had been purposely playing poorly, and I think he was faking an injury and then leaving the court early so that his stats would be really, really low. Yeah. Right? Yeah. I've never heard of that happening in cricket. No. And I can tell you that there are, if you talk to people who do, who bet with syndicates, or who do long-term cricket punting, they'll give you a list of players that any cricket board in the world could look up, right? Yeah. And match the betting data with the moments on the field, and they can have a go at it. That doesn't mean that these players are guilty, right? But that is where the conversations have to start. We don't have those conversations in cricket, and that's the issue for me. That's where we start. We don't have the proper conversations to begin with.
Okay. Is it an open secret amongst journalists, because you work with them and everything, and you're one yourself, a cricket writer? Is it when they're in the commentary box, do they like nudge each other and say, "Oh, there's that bloke again"? Typical, or is it not? Are they just as kind of dumbfounded as many of the fans?
I think, to be honest, a lot of them don't really know. I think the people involved in the betting know a little bit more. Yeah. There's certainly some rumors about players, right? Yeah. A lot of journalists, to be honest, I wouldn't say a lot, but there's a lot of journalists who, if they see something, will report it. I've reported several incidents to the ICC of recent time, not just fixing, by the way, or not just suspicious activity even, but I've reported umpires for things where I feel like the umpire has shown a bias towards a particular team. All sorts of things, because it's like, if I don't do it, who's going to do it, right? Yeah. Like, I don't know if all cricket journalists do that, but no, I remember there's a couple of journalists who've worked in cricket and in other sports, and they say that if you go to the other sports like baseball and cycling and athletics, that every conversation is about, is this guy clean, right? Yeah. And we don't do that in cricket as much. But the vast majority of cricket writing is done at test matches, and test matches are not subject to the same amounts of fixing as random T10 leagues that, you know, pop up in some, you know, in some unregulated. Do you know what I mean?
Like,
you know, I'm not saying there isn't fixing in test cricket, because there has been. We know that. But from my experience of talking to people within the gambling industry, it's usually some of these other leagues that are, you know, that pop up from nowhere, that where things don't make sense.
Okay. I had a story at last year in the final, or in 2023, I was with my friends in a get together. We were watching the India Australia final, and I'm just going to put a disclaimer here that I do not put any implications on anyone. This is just from what I saw, and I'm not saying that anyone was involved in any kind of fixing there. But there was this guy who was sitting in front of us, and I kid you not, he predicted every single ball that happened in the game. Whatever would happen, he predicted to me like 20 seconds before the ball had happened. So I was looking up CricBuzz, whatever was happening on CricBuzz, and there was no scorecard update, and it was not as if there was going to be a 20-second delay between balls. So that, to all of us, we were like 100 people in there, and we all were really shocked. And that guy just disappeared and didn't come back.
No one has a script. That's not how these things are done.
Yeah, I mean, I was a bit shocked.
So what he had was that he probably had access to a chat group where someone was court-siding from the ground and saying what was going to happen for each ball.
Oh, all right.
And he wanted to look like a genius in front of him. Think about it this way. Like, we know, like, that is not even how fixing works. Like, you know, I wrote the big feature on Srisanth, right?
Yeah.
And I think I'm weighted towards Srisanth probably was trying to fix that particular game. You know, he's obviously denied that to me, but having spent months working on that story, I kind of feel like it was.
Yeah.
I think he either got confused with how many runs he needed to go for at the end, or he forgot what the task was. Herschel Gibbs forgot to fix. But also, you can't fix every ball. It would be impossible for the match fixers to fix every ball. And it would think about how much money they would have to pay. More importantly than that, it's a World Cup final. Think about it as an Indian cricketer. What is worth more money to you? Being the person who wins a World Cup final in India, or a one-off payment?
Yeah, true.
It doesn't even make any sense.
Yeah.
And these things always happen for World Cup finals. Everyone's like, it's just like, that doesn't make any sense. If they're going to fix a game, India would have lost the game earlier in the tournament, right? Like, if you want a perfect example of a World Cup game that has a lot of clouds over it, go back to Pakistan in 1999.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
When they knew they had already qualified for the next round, right?
Yeah.
And they lose to Bangladesh. Now, it could just be that they knew they qualified for the next round.
Yeah.
Right? And it was just like, why try? And everything else. But whatever, that is a perfect situation of that sort of thing.
Also, in that tournament, Hansi Cronje, South Africa, had already qualified, and they lost to Zimbabwe. Do you remember that?
Yeah. You can go through it. There's another one where the West Indies were playing Afghanistan in a T20 World Cup, and they lost to Afghanistan, but they pulled Chris Gayle out of the lineup as well. And I don't think anyone knew that Chris Gayle was going to be arrested for that game. I could be wrong. And I'm not accusing any of those sides of fixing, right? What I'm saying is those are the games you would fix.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You're not fixing a World Cup final that your entire legacy is going to be. If you're an Indian player who wins a World Cup, that's 20 years of opening supermarkets.
Yeah.
Right? And Adarsh, you seem to have an Indian accent, and I'm going to assume, are you Indian?
Yeah, I'm Indian.
Yeah? You know how much money those guys get from opening those things.
Yeah.
Right? Going to events, right?
Yeah.
From, you know, commentating, whatever. You put World Cup winner next to an Indian person's name, right?
Yeah.
How much money would you need to fix it? Now think about fixing every single ball. So it's those sort of stories that I think confuse people a little bit, right? Because there are ways of getting information. We did something on Cricket 8, which is a organization that looks at gambling within cricket, and we do live watch-alongs and everything. And we were doing one where, like, myself and Rob Barron were saying, and this ball's been hit for 6, and our co-commentators were sitting there going, how do they know the ball hasn't been hit for 6 yet? But there's a feed that you can get, right, which is it's basically almost 100% live, right? It's stolen from the grounds.
Yeah.
And then someone presses a button and they tell you at the top of the screen, it says 4, wicket, wide, bowler pulled away, injury. drop catch. All these things come up at the top. And these
Yeah.
other people we were working with hadn't looked at this little word at the top.
Yeah.
So you can trick your friends. I've done it before. It's quite a lot of fun. I do it with my son sometimes because if you have Betfair open, right?
Yeah.
And you're watching a game, you can literally do it that way because you can be like, I reckon this next one goes for 4. And everyone will look at you like you're a genius, but it's because you've seen the market jump.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
so there you go.
Yeah, I mean, there's also this thing that he said to us that India's definitely going to win. So we knew it was bogus at the end. Yeah, yeah. Okay.
But yeah.
Yeah. So how do you fix this? Just as an interim, because I also had a counter argument for that. Not completely saying that I also do not believe that an entire game can be scripted, but a counter argument could be posed that people who do the fixing, which is the D company, from what I've seen, or maybe say people like Dawood Ibrahim, they are like very, very powerful people who have connections to politicians, and I think that's why people are a bit afraid to speak out about these things. From what I at least understood, I may be wrong, but I think that may have. Yeah.
There's a part of that, but when it comes down to it, people don't have proof.
Yeah.
That's why you're not seeing this, is because people don't have proof. People knew that baseball writers knew for a long time that steroids were there, but they didn't have the proof. And then when they had the proof, they broke it open, and things changed quite quickly after that. We're still in that point, and then occasionally something happens in cricket, and everything else. And you talk about if you've ever watched a game, and I've seen this 2 different leagues in my life. The first one was the Indian Cricket League. Another one was a recent T10 league.
Yeah.
Where quite clearly there was a fix on between that was a conflicting fix.
Yeah.
So the one team was trying to score. So the bowling team was trying to get as many runs as possible, and the batting team was trying to get as few runs as possible.
Yeah.
At the same time.
Yeah.
And I think I saw a full toss down the leg side in one of these T10 leagues be blocked. Right? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's questionable.
Yeah, I think
the point being is when it gets that obvious, and you'll see when my piece comes out, and you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. You'll be able to see the difference between it actually can get really, really obvious.
Yeah.
I think that will actually show us how little things are fixed, because it's really hard to fix things.
Yeah.
It's not as easy as people think.
Yeah, for me, the worst thing about it is that I read the workings behind the D company, and I've seen that it shows that they use that money for terrorism and all those things. So it feels a bit odd in that reason. But yeah, just to end it here, if you could,
I find it impossible. They're using that money to live really wealthy life. That just sounds like one of those. That just sounds like propaganda, right? Oh, they're fixing the cricket games. People from all around the world are involved in this.
Yeah.
This is not just a Pakistani thing. And that finished in the 90s, if we're being honest. Right?
Yeah.
Like, if you look at it now, it is such a, I think the vast majority of the money comes from Indians.
Yeah.
There are heaps of Indians who are involved in fixing, but there are heaps of people outside of India who are involved in fixing. There are heaps of people in Pakistan are involved in fixing. There are heaps of people everywhere. That whole thing of like, they're funny. That came out of like, uncles chatting amongst themselves in the 90s.
Yeah.
Like, oh, they're fixing the game so that they can do terrorism. They're fixing the game because they want to make a shitload of money. They're not going to give it away to other people.
Yeah.
Right? Like that. As far as I'm aware, that's not how crime syndicates work.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, I read that in Wikipedia. So.
Yeah. Oh, I'm not saying people don't believe it. I'm saying that's not what we are seeing here. And what we are seeing is crime syndicates finding an edge and using that edge. That's what we should be talking about here. And then on the other side of it, we should be talking about why it is allowed to happen so frequently in cricket without very much happening.
Yeah.
And part of that is because it is very hard to police a global sport, right?
Yeah.
Match fixing is not actually illegal in every cricket nation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So they had to be very creative, I believe, with how they charged the people in England when the 3 players went to jail.
Yeah.
I think now Sri Lanka and India have laws.
Yeah.
And I think there's a couple of other countries that could charge people with match fixing. It's actually really hard, right? And then you've got multiple mobile phones, multiple languages, right? Yeah. Coded chats, and all these different things are going on. A lot of my friends in the gambling industry just like, oh, the ACSU does nothing. I'm like, I've seen the ACSU. they work really, really hard. But when it comes down to it, they're not Interpol. And when it comes down to it, Interpol are not particularly good at solving international crimes. And that's what these are. It is a complex, organized crime syndicate globally in multiple languages. Good luck fixing that, everyone.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I think legalizing betting in all countries and regulating and tracking it would be the way to fix it somewhat, right?
Yes. I mean, for me, legalizing betting in India, specifically in India, is so important. But you're right. I think every cricket nation needs to legalize betting. I understand the reasons why, and there are different countries with different beliefs and everything else. But it's a bit like prohibition just doesn't work. You cannot stop people gambling, right? So, the average IPL game would probably have just on the winning market would probably have about $300 million bet on it, right? That's on one market. So if you think about the bracket markets and the top batter and the man of the match markets and all these different things, who knows? It might be like $500 million on a game per game, and some people will tell you it's more than that, right? There's too much money there. That's mostly people betting illegally, right? So you're not stopping it. All you're doing by having something illegal, and this is the same with whether it's alcohol, whether it's tobacco, whether it's drugs. People are not going to stop those things. They are vices for a reason. Prostitution, put any of those things in, people are still going to do it. The only way to make it safer and to make it more governable is to make it legal, right? And people don't want to hear that. But realistically, you either say that the mafia is involved, right, or you make it legal. Those are the two options at the moment, right? And sadly, that is not the situation that we're currently in, and because of that, too many of these things go along. And who gets I may be working on a big project in the future on a bunch of people who've been done for fixing, right? I happen to weirdly know a lot of players in cricket who have been done for fixing and have relationships with them. And a lot of them are just victims of organized crime. Right. And I don't mean they were forced into it, because not all of them were forced into it. Some of them were, but not all of them were forced into it. But they're victims of organized crime, because organized crime looks around for someone who is vulnerable.
Definitely.
Right? And then they try and get in, and then they set them up. And then eventually you're in a situation where you are doing things against who you were as a child. Like, I'll finish with this. I better go, but I'll finish with this last story. Lou Vincent, right? Lou Vincent was a kid in Adelaide who grew up, who one day, him and his mate, found out where Don Bradman lived in Adelaide. They traveled across Adelaide to visit Don Bradman so they could chat to him. Right? That's how much Lou Vincent loved cricket. Right? Imagine how nervous he must have been, him and his mate knocking on Don Bradman's door, asking him to come out, right? How do you go from that to fixing matches, right? Lou Vincent didn't. He was annoyed by cricket, and he was vulnerable, and he had mental health issues and everything else. But he was forced into it by very smart people who, that's what they do. They prey on vulnerable people like Lou Vincent, right?
Jarrod, just before you go, I just wanted to ask you this. Like, for the average cricket lover who hears this and will hear your story tomorrow, what would you say? Like, in 20 years, do we hope for cricket to be better than what it is right now, test cricket and match fixing, or is it just going to be on a downhill path?
I can't imagine that cricket is going to be as run as poorly today as in 20 years' time. So there has to be more safeguards. There has to be a more structured situation that we have going ahead. I think all sports, this is not a cricket thing. I think all sports, I don't know how this happened, and I've still never quite worked it out, but I'd love to know the history of WADA and how all the sports in the world decided that they were just going to have an independent person come in and have a look if they were taking drugs, right? That changed everything, right? We now need the exact same thing in global sport. It's not a cricket thing. You cannot have a local T20 league who needs their brand to be squeaky clean, being the ones who look into whether there was fixing in that league. They won't look into it. They won't fix it. No cricket board wants to be the cricket board that outs their own players for fixing, right? And that is the situation of most of these leagues. So why would you ever do it? You wouldn't. You go back to the Shane Warne, Mark Waugh thing. Cricket Australia found out what happened. They penalised them, and then they kept it quiet.
Yeah.
They didn't want their players to be publicly known as fixers, and quite rightly. Like, I'm not having a go at them.
Yeah.
I understand how business works, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to be involved in that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's where we need to get to. And if we don't get to that, I actually think what's happened in cricket will happen, and we've already seen it completely take over the lower levels of tennis, haven't we? Where tennis matches are, and I've heard stories of table tennis is similar as well now. I had a Google alert on my for a sports corruption at one stage, and I had to stop it because of the amount of stories that came through to me every day.
Wow.
Right, it was too many. I was planning on writing a book on a year in sports corruption, and in the end, I was like, it would actually take me 5 years to go through 1 year of sports corruption. Like, I just will never be able to go through it.
It might be like War and Peace.
It was epic, man. I would have needed like 10 researchers to help me out, because the incredible stories of like people putting motors in their bikes, right? Like, all these sorts of random things, and then you have to go through the right wing, the trans stuff of like, that person's a man.
Yeah.
They're not a man. Shut up, idiot.
Okay.
All that sort of. You have to go through all that as well. And when it comes down to it, this is not a cricket issue. And so, if you want me to know what's going to happen in 20 years, I don't know, but I really worry about the future of sports because of this.
Okay.
Because does it not? It feels like to me, the future of sports is going closer and closer to WWE.
Yeah.
Right. Until you get to a point where it's like, is there any point me putting on this sport if I know? And I don't just mean people cheating to lose, right?
No.
Yeah.
But the Houston Astros. I'll tell you two sporting teams. I read the whole book on the Houston Astros. I read the whole book. I even had the guy on my podcast after who wrote the book on it, and I read the whole book, going, I wonder how they're cheating.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the Sky cycling team that Adam will know about. Every article, every positive article that was written about them, I was like, this just feels like they're cheating in a way that isn't performance-enhancing drugs to me, right? Now, that's just a lifetime of working in sport and noticing these patterns, right?
Yeah.
Both of those, that's basically what happened with both of those. Houston Astros were massively cheating.
Yeah.
And every single cycler in the Sky team had asthma or whatever it was, right? But what an incredible thing that all those asthmatics are so good at cycling, right?
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
So the point being is, how long before that is the predominant position of sport?
Yeah.
Right? We're not there yet.
Yeah.
But how long before it's the predominant position of sports fans?
Yeah.
And I think that's the big question for sport.
Thank you for your time, Jarrod. You're by far the most insightful cricket analyst I know, and you've done a album cover for Sean P Diddy. So yeah, that elevates it even further. Yeah.
Does that elevate me? I think that actually these days I think it's the opposite. It used to be a really cool story about me, and now it's like not as cool a story.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for being on here, and we'll see you again, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks very much. Very kind of you.
Thank you.
No worries. Cheers, guys.
Cheers. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Is the recording stopped? Can I